The sterile smell of antiseptic hung thick in the air as Emily stepped into the cold hospital room. Her eyes fell on her son David, lying motionless in the bed, hooked up to machines. Her heart skipped a beat, and for a moment, time seemed to freeze. "How long does he have left?" she asked the doctor, her voice barely above a whisper. The doctor looked at her, his face etched with empathy, yet the words that came next shattered her world. "I'm sorry, there's nothing more we can do." The words echoed in her mind as she stood frozen, the weight of them crashing down on her. Her knees buckled, and for a second she thought she might collapse. Her only child, her everything, was slipping through her fingers. The room felt like it was closing in on her, suffocating her. Emily's breath hitched as she struggled to keep composure. But how could she? How could she let go of the one person she had fought so hard to protect? "David, please," she whispered, tears now streaming down her face. The doctor, seemingly unsure how to comfort her, quietly turned and left the room. Alone, Emily clutched her son's cold hand, as if willing him to fight, to keep holding on. She couldn't let him go. She wouldn't. But the harsh truth lingered. She might have to. Days passed since the doctor's harsh words. Emily's world had shrunk to the sterile white walls of the hospital where time felt frozen. She couldn't go back to her old life. The weight of her son's condition pressed on her chest like a stone. At night, she would sit beside his bed, staring at the rhythmic beeping of the machines that kept him alive. But it wasn't enough. Nothing was enough. Each day brought more uncertainty, more bills, more questions. Emily hadn't left the hospital in days, her only comfort the soft, shallow rise and fall of her son's chest. "What am I supposed to do now?" she whispered to herself, unsure whether the question was for the universe or for her own tired mind. She longed for the life she used to know, the one where David's laughter filled their small apartment, and there were no endless hospital visits or cold medical bills. But this was her reality now. The doctor had said there was nothing more they could do. She didn't believe him, but at the same time, she was starting to wonder if he was right. Emily's heart ached as she realized how fragile everything she had built, everything she loved, was. And yet, she couldn't give up. She couldn't stop fighting. Not now. Not ever. A week had passed, and the mounting medical bills were becoming impossible to ignore. Emily's phone rang constantly, each call more pressing than the last. She didn't have the answers they wanted. How could she, when she barely had the energy to get out of bed? But the debts kept stacking up, and the bills kept coming. Emily had always prided herself on providing for her son, never asking for help, never showing weakness. But now, with her son fighting for his life and her resources running dry, she was faced with a choice she never thought she'd have to make. That's when he showed up. A man from her past, Victor. He had been part of her life years ago, before everything changed. He was charming, ambitious, and had always seemed like the kind of man who could solve problems with a snap of his fingers. Now he stood in front of her, his smile calm, but his offer unsettling. "I can help you, Emily," he said, his voice low and coaxing. "I can clear the debt, pay for the treatment your son needs, in exchange for something." His words hung in the air, and for the first time in a long while, Emily's breath caught in her throat. What was he asking? And was it worth it? Victor's offer was a lifeline, at least that's how it appeared. The treatment for David was expensive, and with Emily's finances crumbling, she was desperate. But as Victor continued, she realized the price wasn't just financial. His offer came with strings attached. "All I need from you, Emily," he said, his tone shifting from smooth to insistent, "is for you to let me in, just a small favor, and I'll take care of everything." The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Emily froze, her heart pounding in her chest. She knew exactly what he meant, but she couldn't bring herself to say it. The guilt began to settle in her stomach, twisting and turning. Was she really willing to give up her dignity to save her son? She wasn't sure. Her mind raced with options, but there were none. There was only Victor's offer, and the fear that without it, her son's chance of survival would slip through her fingers. Her hands trembled as she reached for the phone to check the latest bill, a reminder of how dire her situation had become. She looked up at Victor, her face blank, but the turmoil in her eyes spoke volumes. "I can't," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I can't do that." The silence that followed was deafening. The days blurred together as Emily tried to focus on one thing, her son's recovery. But the weight of Victor's offer hung over her like a shadow. She couldn't shake the thought of what it meant for her. How could she survive without help? And yet, how could she let someone like Victor control her life again? The internal struggle was consuming her. Each night, she watched David, his small chest rising and falling with the aid of machines. She whispered promises to him that she wasn't sure she could keep. "We'll get through this, I swear we will." But with every passing day, she could feel herself breaking. And when the call came, Victor's offer was still on the table. She realized just how close she was to the edge. She had no choice but to face the truth. The world had changed around her, and so had she. The decision was hers to make, but it felt like the weight of the universe was pressing down on her. "I'll do whatever it takes," she whispered, her voice filled with resignation. But, as the words left her mouth, she knew the cost would be higher than she ever imagined. Emily couldn't escape the thought of Victor's offer. The guilt gnawed at her, pulling her in two directions. She could take the help, relieve the mounting pressure, and give David a fighting chance. But, at what cost? The past had come back to haunt her, and it was asking for more than she was willing to give. Each day, the medical bills piled higher, and her strength drained away. She sat in the hospital room, staring at David, who still lay motionless, and felt as if the walls were closing in on her. She couldn't focus. She couldn't sleep. The decision was paralyzing. The man who had once been part of her life, Victor, was offering a way out, but every fiber of her being screamed not to take it. Yet the thought of losing her son, of being unable to do anything to save him, made her question everything. "What am I supposed to do?" she asked herself quietly, her voice breaking. She had been strong for so long, but now the burden felt unbearable. She needed help, but it felt like it would cost her more than she could afford. Victor's persistent calls were becoming harder to ignore. He had offered help again, and Emily was beginning to question her pride. She was so close to breaking. Her son was deteriorating, and the financial strain was overwhelming. The offers came with a price. There was no doubt about that. But what was the cost of not accepting? She would lose her son, her only family, her world. Emily's exhaustion weighed heavily on her. She had been a warrior, never asking for help, always making do with less. But now she found herself on the edge, grasping at whatever she could to stay afloat. A voice in her head told her to stand firm, to keep her dignity intact. But another voice, quieter, more desperate, whispered that she might not survive if she didn't let go of that pride. Her thoughts swirled in chaos, and for the first time, Emily didn't know what to do. She was paralyzed by indecision. "Is it worth it?" she asked softly, looking at David's frail form. She wasn't sure if she was asking herself or God. Emily couldn't keep running from the truth. Victor had given her an ultimatum, and it was clear she had no other options left. Her heart twisted as she picked up the phone to call him back. The offer was too tempting to refuse. She knew she was crossing a line, and the shame was unbearable, but her son's life was at stake. "I'll do it," she whispered into the phone, her voice shaking. She heard Victor's voice on the other end, smooth and satisfied. "Good," he replied, his tone colder than she expected. "You've made the right choice, Emily." She felt a cold knot tighten in her stomach, and a shiver ran down her spine. She had just agreed to something she wasn't proud of, but at that moment, all she could think of was David, his fragile body, his shallow breaths. She was losing him, and now she was losing herself. The following days felt like a blur of activity. Emily was caught in the whirlwind of hospital visits, paperwork, and endless phone calls. The relief of knowing David would receive the treatment he needed was overshadowed by the guilt and fear that consumed her. She had sold a part of herself to save her son, and the price would never feel right. But each time she saw David's eyes flutter open, each time his small hand squeezed hers, she reminded herself that she had done it for him. Her love for him was unwavering, even if the method she chose felt like a betrayal of her own principles. As the days passed, the tension in the hospital room seemed to lift slightly, replaced by the glimmer of hope she had been too afraid to embrace. Emily sat beside David, stroking his hair, watching his breathing grow steadier. "Please, let this work," she whispered to him, her voice thick with emotion. She wanted to believe that the sacrifice had been worth it. She wanted to believe that this was the turning point, the moment she could finally breathe again. As the days passed, Emily found herself sinking deeper into a quiet despair. Victor's influence lingered, casting a shadow over every decision she made. She could feel him pulling the strings, watching from the background as she navigated the precarious balance between saving her son and losing herself. Each time she saw Victor's name on her phone, a wave of nausea rolled over her. She hated herself for needing him, for accepting his help. But what other choice did she have? She couldn't escape the feeling that she had sold her soul. Still, as David's condition improved, Emily clung to the fragile hope that she was doing the right thing. Her hands shook as she watched him sleep, the soft rise and fall of his chest, reminding her that this battle was far from over. But she had made a promise to herself, to fight for her son no matter the cost. "I'll keep fighting," she whispered, her voice full of quiet determination. "For you, David, I'll keep fighting." Emily had always avoided confronting her past, burying memories deep where they couldn't hurt her. But now, they resurfaced with a vengeance. Victor's manipulative ways and the choices she made out of desperation haunted her thoughts. She thought she had moved on, but as her son's condition fluctuated, she felt the grip of her old fears tightening around her. The shame of the life she once led, the relationships she had destroyed, and the opportunities she had let slip away, were all reminders that no matter how much she tried to escape her past, it followed her. She spent sleepless nights replaying the moments that had shaped her, the mistakes she had made, and the one decision that had brought her to this moment, the decision to accept Victor's offer. Was it worth it? She asked herself again. She had no answers, only the overwhelming weight of regret and sorrow. She couldn't help but wonder if things would have turned out differently had she made other choices. Could she have avoided Victor's influence if she hadn't been so desperate? Could she have been a better mother to David without sacrificing so much of herself? But those thoughts were useless now. The past couldn't be undone, and all she could do was keep moving forward. But with each passing day, she feared the cost of the choices she had made. Victor's voice echoed in Emily's mind, always there when she least expected it. He had promised her everything. The financial support, the treatment for David, the safety she so desperately craved. But now she was beginning to see that his help came with more than just a price tag. She had trusted him once, but now, as the weight of his hold over her life became clearer, she realized how dangerously close she had come to losing herself completely. He was never truly on her side. He had always been working for his own interests, and she had been too blinded by her need for help to see it. She thought about the things he had promised, and the things he had taken in return. The guilt gnawed at her every moment. She wasn't just trapped by her circumstances. She had actively put herself in this position. How could she have been so blind? "I can't let him control me," she whispered to herself, her voice full of determination. But even as she spoke those words, Emily knew how difficult it would be to break free. Victor was everywhere. His influence stretched into every part of her life, and it felt impossible to escape. Yet, for David's sake, Emily knew she had to find a way to reclaim control, to stop being a pawn in someone else's game. It was time to confront the past and face the truth of her decisions head-on. The night was Emily's time to reflect, and this night was no different. She sat by David's bed, the soft hum of the machines providing the only sound in the room. Her son's breathing had steadied, but Emily could feel the storm brewing within her. She couldn't keep hiding from herself any longer. The past had caught up with her, and no matter how hard she tried to bury the memories, they kept resurfacing. Victor wasn't the only thing that haunted her. The choices she made when she was younger, the paths she had walked that led her here, all weighed heavily on her heart. There were days she barely recognized the person she had become. Had she always been this broken, or had life slowly torn her apart? She longed for the simplicity of her past, the days when her biggest concern was making ends meet. But now, nothing was simple. Nothing was easy. Emily glanced at David, sleeping peacefully despite everything. "I'll make it right," she whispered, more to herself than to anyone else. "I'll find a way to fix this." But the truth was, she didn't know if she could. She didn't know if the cost of redemption was something she was willing to pay. But in that moment, all she knew was that she couldn't keep running. The confrontation with Victor was inevitable. Emily had no more excuses, no more ways to put it off. She had given him control over her life for too long, but no more. She couldn't keep living in the shadow of his influence. Well, it was time to take back what was hers, to find her strength again. As she stood outside his office, her hands were clammy, and her heart pounded in her chest. She wasn't just confronting him, she was confronting herself. The woman she had become, the mistakes she had made, the sacrifices she had been forced to accept. All of it had led her here. As she walked into the office, Victor's cold smile greeted her. "I was wondering when you'd come," he said, his voice smooth, almost mocking. "I knew you'd crack eventually." His words stung, but Emily refused to let him see how much they hurt. "I'm done," she said, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her. "I'm taking control of my life again." Victor's smile faltered, just for a moment, but it was enough to let Emily know that she had struck a nerve. For the first time in a long while, she felt something close to power. She wasn't his victim anymore. She was her own person, and she would not be controlled. The aftermath of confronting Victor left Emily feeling both liberated and terrified. She had taken back control, but at what cost? She wasn't sure what would happen next, but she knew that she had to keep moving forward, no matter how uncertain the path was. David's recovery was still fragile, and the financial burden was far from over, but at least now, Emily felt like she was the one driving her fate. There was a sense of peace in her decision, a quiet satisfaction in knowing that she had stood up for herself. But that peace was short-lived. Her future was still uncertain, and there were many challenges ahead. Victor wasn't going to let her go that easily, and she knew that the battles wouldn't stop here. But for the first time in months, Emily felt like she had a fighting chance. "I can do this," she said, more to herself than anyone else. "For David, I can do this." Emily's world felt like it was on the edge of a precipice. After confronting Victor, she had managed to claw her way to a new beginning, but the weight of her choices continued to loom over her. David's recovery had been slow, but there was a noticeable improvement. The doctors spoke with more hope, but Emily knew better than to take anything for granted. Each day brought new fears, new uncertainties. But there was something else, something unexpected. The more time she spent by David's side, the more she realized that she had been so focused on survival, on keeping her head above water, that she had neglected her own needs. She had given up so much of herself, lost so much to protect David and give him a future. But what future did she have if she lost herself in the process? Sitting beside David's bed, the machines beeping softly in the background, Emily couldn't help but wonder what it would take for her to finally heal. "I fought so hard for you, David," she whispered, her voice full of exhaustion. "But when does it stop? When do I stop feeling like I'm drowning?" The question hung in the air, unanswered as she stroked his hair, her heart full of conflicting emotions. Weeks passed, and though David's health improved, Emily felt increasingly disconnected from everything around her. She was consumed by worry, consumed by the thought that any moment could be the last. Her life had become an endless loop of hospital visits, doctor's appointments, and sleepless nights. The exhaustion was taking its toll, and with each passing day, she felt herself slipping further away from the woman she used to be. One night, after another long shift at the hospital, Emily found herself walking home in the rain, the cold water soaking through her clothes. She had gotten used to the weight of the world bearing down on her, but tonight it felt different. She didn't know what it was, whether it was the rain or the feeling of hopelessness creeping in again, but she felt a deep loneliness that she couldn't shake. "I can't keep doing this," she whispered to herself, her voice barely audible over the rain. "I'm not strong enough." For the first time in months, Emily allowed herself to acknowledge the truth. She was broken, and there was no shame in admitting it. But admitting it was only the first step. What she needed was a way out of the darkness, a way to find the strength she had lost along the way. The following day, Emily found herself back at the hospital, her mind in a haze. David's recovery seemed to be inching forward, but the emotional toll on Emily was too much to bear. She hadn't slept in days, and her nerves were frayed. Her doctor, noticing her exhaustion, had urged her to take some time for herself. But how could she? How could she step away from her son when he still needed her? Emily knew that she couldn't keep going on like this, trapped in a cycle of exhaustion, guilt, and fear. But the thought of taking a break felt wrong. Her duty to David consumed her. "How do I do this?" she asked herself, the question coming out in a raw, almost frantic whisper. "How do I heal when I'm not sure how to keep going?" She sat in the hospital waiting room, surrounded by empty chairs, the fluorescent lights buzzing above her. For the first time in months, she allowed herself to stop fighting for a moment, to just feel the weight of her own emotions. The tears came without warning, streaming down her face as she looked down at the floor. She had never felt more lost. It was the middle of the night when Emily finally allowed herself a moment of peace. She had left the hospital for a brief break, and as she sat on the park bench, the cool night air filling her lungs, she closed her eyes and let the silence wash over her. She had been running on empty for so long, and for the first time she could feel the weight of everything she had been through. The guilt, the exhaustion, the never-ending fear of losing David, it all crashed down on her, leaving her feeling utterly drained. "I don't know how much longer I can do this," she whispered into the night. It wasn't a cry for help, it was simply a recognition of her limitations. She couldn't do it alone anymore. The thought of asking for help had always terrified her, but she knew now that it was the only way to move forward. She couldn't keep carrying the burden of her son's illness, her own self-doubt, and the weight of the past. It was time to let go of the pride that had kept her isolated for so long. "I need help," she said aloud, a small but profound admission that felt like a weight lifting from her chest. She didn't have all the answers, but this was a step toward healing. It was time to ask for the support she desperately needed. The next morning, Emily made the phone call. The voice on the other end was familiar, warm, and kind. It was a friend from her past, someone she had distanced herself from, someone who had always been there but whom she had pushed away when things got hard. "I need help," Emily said, her voice trembling slightly. The words felt strange but necessary. The response was immediate and filled with compassion. "You're not alone," her friend replied. "We'll figure this out together." Emily felt a rush of relief, followed by a twinge of guilt for not reaching out sooner. But the truth was, she had been afraid of burdening others, afraid of admitting she couldn't do it all. But now, in the quiet moments after the call, Emily understood that asking for help wasn't a sign of weakness, it was an act of strength. She had finally broken through the walls she had built around herself. "I'll be okay," she whispered to herself, feeling the first glimmer of hope in a long time. It wasn't going to be easy, but for the first time in months, she felt like she had a fighting chance. Days turned into weeks, and Emily's life slowly began to find a new rhythm. She was still exhausted, still afraid, but the burden of isolation had lifted. David's recovery continued, albeit slowly, but she could see the change in him. He was fighting just like her. Still, even with the support of her friend and the team of doctors, there were moments when Emily questioned everything. The weight of the past, the shame of the decisions she had made, hung over her like a dark cloud. It wasn't easy to erase the doubts, to stop blaming herself for everything that had gone wrong. But the moments of doubt were fewer now. The time she spent with David, the quiet moments of connection, felt more precious than anything else. Her love for him had always been unwavering, but now she had started to realize that taking care of herself wasn't just about her. It was about being strong for him too. "I don't know how I made it through," she admitted one evening, her voice a mix of exhaustion and gratitude. "But I'm here. We're still here." It wasn't a perfect resolution, but it was progress. Emily had learned that even in the darkest times, there was light to be found. Sometimes, it was just a matter of allowing yourself to see it. One evening, Emily found herself standing at the window of their small apartment, gazing out at the city skyline. The sounds of the city felt distant now, less intrusive. Her perspective had changed. The emotional roller coaster of the past months had taken its toll, but there was something else. Something she hadn't expected. She felt a sense of renewal, a quiet strength she hadn't known she had. As she looked at the twinkling lights in the distance, she allowed herself a small, hopeful smile. "I never thought I could get through this," she whispered to herself. "But I did. We did." The weight of the past wasn't gone, and there were still challenges ahead. But for the first time, Emily felt like she could breathe again. She could face the future, no matter what it held. She knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but she also knew that she wasn't alone anymore. And that made all the difference. As the weeks turned into months, Emily began to carve out time for herself, something she hadn't done in years. It wasn't easy. There were still days when the fear of losing David crept in, when the weight of the past seemed too much to bear. But she knew she had to try. She had to learn to live again, to reconnect with who she was before everything had changed. One afternoon, she took a walk in the park, something she hadn't done in forever. The fresh air felt good against her skin, and the simple act of putting one foot in front of the other brought a sense of peace she hadn't realized she needed. She paused by a bench watching the children play, and felt a wave of gratitude wash over her. For the first time she allowed herself to feel hope, real hope, not the kind that was born of desperation, but the kind that grew from healing. "I'm stronger than I thought," she said quietly to herself, the realization grounding her. "And I'm not giving up." Emily returned to the hospital, not as a desperate mother clinging to hope, but as someone who had found peace within herself. David's recovery had come a long way, though it was still a slow process. But this time, Emily wasn't consumed by fear. She was present, truly present, for him. She sat beside his bed, holding his hand, watching as he slept soundly. "You've come so far," she whispered softly, her voice filled with pride. The doctors were hopeful, and though Emily was cautious, she allowed herself to believe in the possibility of a future. Not just for David, but for herself too. The last few months had taught her more than she could have ever imagined. She had fought for her son, but in the process, she had learned to fight for herself. "We'll make it through this," she promised, not just to David, but to herself as well. For the first time, she believed it. As the final days of David's treatment approached, Emily felt a bittersweet mixture of relief and sadness. She had spent so long focusing on survival that now, with the end of this chapter in sight, she wasn't sure what came next. But she wasn't afraid. For the first time in years, she felt a sense of closure, a quiet certainty that things would be okay. She had found herself again, learned to lean on others, and discovered that asking for help didn't make her weak, it made her human. She stood at David's hospital bed, holding his hand one last time before he was discharged, her heart full of gratitude. "We did it," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. The journey wasn't over, but Emily had come so far. We made it through. And in that moment, surrounded by the quiet hum of the hospital, she knew she had won the most important battle of all, the battle for herself. Emily had come so far, but the ghosts of her past still whispered in the quietest moments. Her relationship with David was stronger, but she couldn't ignore the emotional scars she carried. "Can I ever let go?" she wondered, staring at her reflection. The guilt of her past decisions still weighed on her heart. She wasn't sure how to heal from everything that had happened, but she knew one thing: she couldn't keep holding on to the past. It was time to move forward. But how? David's health had continued to improve, but now Emily was left with a new challenge: rebuilding her own life. She had given so much to care for him, but now she needed to find a way to rediscover herself. "I can't keep losing myself for him," she thought, standing outside in the evening breeze. But I can't let go of my love for him either. She understood the delicate balance she had to find, one that would allow her to heal while still being the mother David needed. It was time for her to find herself again. Emily spent the next few days reconnecting with old friends, taking small steps back into a world she had long ignored. I can still have a life beyond being a caregiver, she thought as she shared a laugh with an old friend. It was strange, almost foreign, but she was beginning to understand that her identity wasn't just tied to David's illness. She had been a person before all of this, and she needed to rediscover that woman. Slowly, Emily was finding joy in the little things again. And it felt good. As days turned into weeks, Emily began to carve out more time for herself. She spent mornings reading, afternoons walking in the park, and evenings with David. But in the stillness, she often wondered if she had the strength to fully heal. Am I enough? She asked herself one night as she stood by David's bed, watching him sleep peacefully. The question lingered in her mind, but she realized that it didn't matter. She didn't need to be perfect. She just needed to keep trying. One evening, Emily finally admitted the truth. She was stronger than she thought. The road to healing had been long, but she had come further than she imagined. With David's continued recovery and her own growing sense of self, Emily felt a shift in her heart. I don't have all the answers, she whispered, but I'm going to be okay. It wasn't just about surviving anymore. It was about living. Emily had found her way back to herself, and that was enough. Emily's life had finally begun to feel whole again. She spent more time with David, sharing moments of joy and connection. The laughter they once shared seemed more real now, untainted by fear. We made it through, Emily thought as they played in the park. It wasn't just about surviving anymore. It was about enjoying the moments, no matter how small. Every day, Emily learned to embrace life again. She wasn't afraid of the future anymore, she was ready for it. David's laughter was music to Emily's ears, and for the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to dream of the future. I didn't think we'd get here, she thought as they sat down to a meal together, but here we are. The journey had been difficult, but Emily had learned to cherish the beauty in life's unpredictability. No longer did she feel consumed by fear or regret. I'm so proud of you, she whispered to David, her voice full of love. As Emily watched David grow stronger, she realized how much she had grown herself. The past had tried to break her, but it had only made her more resilient. I'm not the same person I was, she reflected one evening as she looked out at the sunset. And that's okay. Her journey had been difficult, but it had shaped her into someone capable of facing whatever life had left to offer. Emily had learned that healing was a lifelong process, and she was finally at peace with that. The days ahead weren't guaranteed, but for the first time, Emily felt ready for whatever came next. We've made it this far, she thought, her hand gently holding David's. We'll make it the rest of the way. The weight of the past no longer dictated her life. Instead, Emily felt empowered by the present, determined to continue embracing the beauty of each day. Together, they would face the future with courage and love. Emily's heart was full as she looked at her son, knowing they had overcome the hardest part. Emily stood at the door, watching David play in the yard. A sense of peace washed over her. They had made it through the darkness, and now they were free. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time she wasn't afraid. I would do it all over again, she whispered to herself, the weight of her past finally lifting. It hadn't been easy, but Emily knew she had found something more important than survival. She had found joy, and that was enough.